Okay, so we have two presentations. One is by Yuni's going to go first, and then Javed will be the second one.
So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Yuni. I started the PhD on March last year, right before the pandemic hit. My thesis examining the agrarian transition in the coastal regions of Indonesia, particularly looking at the impact of the increasing integration of coastal households into the global market structures in seafood and seaweed industries, and the broader livelihood change that is occurring in Indonesian coastal regions. I was planning to do the fieldwork to Indonesia this year, but unfortunately that's no longer the options because of the border policy and the COVID situation in Indonesia. So I made considerable changes in my methodology. The past year, I have been trying to understand the growth of Indonesia's marine fisheries and aquaculture sector and the changing situations of coastal livelihoods across Indonesia from the available data. And now I'd like to present the results so far. Indonesia is the world's largest archipelago comprised of more than 17,000 islands, with 2/3 of its territory are water areas. The country is the second biggest fish producer after China. Its coastal and marine mariculture is also reportedly one of the fastest growing farm food industries across the globe. Over 90% of Indonesian marine fish producers are small-scale fishers and fish farmers, such that coastal marine resources play a vital role for their livelihoods and well-being. Marine capture fisheries and mariculture together were estimated to support the livelihoods of around 7 million Indonesians in 2018. Indonesia's fisheries sector has been growing steadily in the past 5 decades and is increasingly important not only to the national economy, but also to the global seafood and seaweed industries. The question is, what does this mean for the livelihoods of coastal communities across Indonesia? This article aims to understand the growth of seafood and seaweed industries and what it means for the livelihoods of small-scale producers across coastal regions of Indonesia. There are 3 main categories of coastal activity in Indonesia. The first and the most important is marine capture fisheries. The second is brackish water aquaculture, which is mostly shrimp and milkfish farming. And the last one is marine aquaculture, in which the main commodity is seaweed, although high-valued commodities such as pearls, snapper, grouper, and lobster are also cultivated. A quick note on the datasets I'm using. To understand the growth in seafood and seaweed industry, I use FAO fish statistics, datasets from Ministry of Maritime Affairs and Fisheries of Indonesia, trade map data from International Trade Center, and various industry reports. The second category of datasets are 2004 and 2014 National Survey and Agricultural Household Income, which is associated with the agricultural census carried out every 10 years. These datasets are used to analyze capital intensification in smallholders production and changes in income portfolio in these households. The next one is the raw data from 2014 income survey. I have obtained household unit data from Indonesia's 17 major coastal provinces, covering 15,520 households, which I used to analyze the income distribution. And the last ones are the 2003 and 2013 agricultural census, which I used to analyze the livelihood changes among fishery-dependent households. My first argument is that while the growth of Indonesia's seafood industry has been positive, it has also been capital intensive and its future is highly constrained by environmental sustainability. From the graph on the left, we can see that seaweed production has experienced the most dramatic increase since 2010 in terms of volume, up from less than 4 million tons in 2010 to over 9 million tons in 2018, with Indonesia now accounting for 38% of global seaweed production. However, in terms of market value, wild-caught seafood and shrimp are the prime export commodities, along with tuna, crabs, and squids. Moreover, since 2010, fisheries grew faster than that of agriculture in Indonesia, and faster than that in China, the Philippines, Malaysia, or Thailand. Indonesia's main export markets are the US, China, and Japan. The US alone absorbed 38% of the country's fish exports. However, concerns over both food safety and ocean sustainability, especially in Europe and the US, have translated into more stringent regulation on food safety, such as hygiene and traceability of products, and market-driven demand for environmental-based certifications. Compliance with these high standards and certification present a challenge for Indonesian small-scale fishers and fish farmers. A study by Sari in Sulawesi and Sumatra found that small-scale shrimp farmers have low capacity to comply with export standards due to the lack of human, physical, and financial capitals, and are increasingly being excluded from export-oriented supply chains. This concern has so far been less of an issue in the domestic market, which is also growing strongly. Between 2003 and 2013, there has been an increased capital intensification in marine capture fisheries and brackish water aquaculture, with an increased dependence on motorized boats for marine capture fisheries. In addition, there has been a significant increase in the number of households with main income from wage labor in marine capture fisheries. In brackish water aquaculture, capital intensification can be seen from the increased size of cultivation areas per household, as well as increased number of wage laborers. Seaweed farming, however, doesn't show any indicator for capital intensification, as it is exclusively carried out by household-based operation and largely use traditional techniques in production process. Despite the steady growth and promising demand, the future growth of Indonesian seafood industry is constrained by environmental sustainability due to unsustainable fishing and aquaculture practices. There has been considerable progress made by Indonesian government since 2015 in the efforts to combat illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing from foreign vessels, which has yielded some positive results. However, unsustainable fishing practice by domestic vessels continues. In 2017, over 50% of Indonesian fish stocks were fully exploited and around 40% are overexploited. In addition, a study by Malik in 2017 noted that more than 1 million hectares of mangrove forest were lost across Indonesia between 1982 to 2003, much of it converted into shrimp farming. For these reasons, any expansion for marine capture fisheries and shrimp farming in Indonesia in the immediate future will damage the marine and coastal ecosystem and threaten the sustainability of fisheries-based livelihoods. The next thing I want to talk about is coastal livelihoods. My argument is that the livelihoods of Indonesian coastal communities are increasingly diversified with less dependency on marine fisheries. Yet, fishery-based household is becoming more specialized. Statistic Indonesia recorded that there are over 12,000 coastal villages across Indonesia. However, rural communities in these coastal villages pursue a diverse range of livelihood strategies, most of which are highly dependent on access to natural resources. But agriculture is still dominant over marine capture fisheries. It should be noted that the growth of fisheries sector goes beyond its share to GDP or export earnings. More importantly, it contributes significantly to the food security of millions of Indonesians. An important share of fish landed by small-scale fishers are low-valued commodities for domestic consumption, such as cats, mackerel, anchovies, and milkfish. Indonesian per capita fish consumption is a much higher proportion of animal protein than the average global, which is only 16%. This makes Indonesia one of the most fish-dependent countries in the world in terms of diet. Per capita fish consumption is especially higher in the more remote provinces where opportunities for livelihood diversification is low, and lower in provinces with more diverse livelihood, such as in Java and Bali. Figure A on the left shows that in 2013, the largest share of fishery-dependent households generated an annual income of below 10 million rupiah, or approximately 1,000 Australian dollars, from the fishery activity which they identified as their main income. Seaweed farming generates the least income compared to both brackish water aquaculture and marine capture fisheries, but also requires the lowest capital investment and is relatively accessible, such that it is generally favored by the poor. However, its nature also allows this household to engage in other income-generating activities more freely, as it does not take as much time as the other two. And therefore, on the figure B on the right, the difference of total household income between the three activities become less significant. On the other hand, brackish water aquaculture generates the highest income and presents more opportunities for accumulation. However, it also comes with high capital investment and high risk. Households who engage in this activity generally comes from a position of being relatively well-resourced. Between 2003 and 2013, the number of marine capture fisheries households decreased by 61%, but the share of households who identify it as main income increased by over 60%, as seen on the right. During the same period, there was a significant increase in the number of outboard engines and motorized vessels, and the number of wage laborers in marine capture fisheries. This means that, although more than 700,000 households exited capture fisheries, those who stayed have managed to increase their capital resources and economic scale, and therefore earn significantly higher income, hence becoming their main income. On the other hand, the number of fish farming households grew, which was driven by the expansion of seaweed farming. Yet, the share of households who identify these activities as their main income decreased significantly. In other words, more coastal households engaged in these activities, but not as their main income. This shows that these fish and seaweed farming present as alternative livelihood strategies for many coastal households. This graph shows the changing income portfolio for households who identify each of the three categories as their main income source. The income structure of marine capture fisheries household was relatively unchanged between 2003 and 2013. It remained their single biggest income source. As for brackish-water aquaculture and marine aquaculture, there appeared to be some increased dependency on the said activity as the main income. In terms of livelihood diversification, seaweed farming, presented here under marine aquaculture, demonstrates the most diverse income portfolio, but one still closely linked to agriculture. Seaweed farming is also the least likely to be impacted by the resource degradation caused by unsustainable fishing and mangrove loss. In this regard, seaweed farming presents an opportunity for coastal communities, particularly the poor, whose livelihoods are increasingly squeezed by the environmental impact and capital intensification occurring in both capture fisheries and brackish-water aquaculture. Finally, brackish-water aquaculture households tend to engage more in non-agricultural sectors as their secondary income. There are three main findings from this research. The first one is, although seafood industry is growing rapidly and is increasingly capital intensive, it becomes less important for livelihoods of the coastal societies. Coastal livelihoods are increasingly diverse and less dependent on fishery and aquaculture. This pattern is consistent with the previous literature on agrarian transition across Southeast Asia, most notably the work of Jonathan Rigg, even though most of this work have largely focused on terrestrial or land-based agriculture, such as rice farming or plantation crops. Second point, however, this study also found that fishery-dependent households are becoming more specialized and capital-intensive. Specialization and intensification increased household income, but might result in major changes in household system and relation with external markets. Previous work in this topic, in the context of land agriculture, for example, the work of Tanya Lee in Land's End, showed that households specialized in certain commodities moved away from being food self-sufficient to being market-dependent. Specialization also creates opportunities for accumulation by highly capitalized segment of the society. Another important finding is that seaweed farming presents an opportunity for the poor household to gain income without much capital investment, and at the same time engage with other income-generating activities. For this reason, seaweed farming is suitable for the increasingly diversified nature of livelihoods across rural coastal regions. Taken together, this study enhances our understanding on the changes in the livelihoods of Indonesia's coastal societies. Yet, its most important contribution may be that it raises a variety of intriguing questions for future study. Much work remains to be done before a full understanding of the context of the extent of agrarian transition in Indonesia's coastal region is established. That's all from me. Thank you very much. Bob?
Thank you. That was really very good presentation, and also really good management of time. You gave a lot of data for a really short, a really compact presentation. So thank you very much. So that gives us a few minutes for questions. So who goes first?
Could I? Sure. Thanks, Uni. I really enjoyed that presentation. It was very clear. I've got two questions. One is the role of gender. Unless I missed it, you didn't emphasize that. And certainly in Jonathan Rigg's work, the different or the gendered changes to household tasks and labour is a big component of livelihood diversification. So I wouldn't mind your observations there. Secondly, just a point of clarification, seaweed, is that mainly used for animal feed as an input? What are the uses of seaweed?
Seaweed, Indonesia is the largest producer of hydrocolloid seaweeds, and it's mainly used for food thickener and cosmetics and medical usage. Yeah, so it's not for human consumption. And I'm going to answer the first questions. One of the things that I learned from reading the data is that gender in fisheries statistic, women contribution to fisheries sector is underestimated. So there is not much data on women contribution to fishery in statistics. However, when we read a lot of research on seaweed, for example, most of the farmers, a lot more farmers are actually women, because especially in post-harvest activities like in drying seaweeds and packaging the seaweeds, more women are taking part in that. And also in crabs industry, for example, women have more important part in post-harvest activities, such as in processing crab meats and packaging. So yeah, although that's not included in the statistic, but actually the role of women in fisheries is also important. Thank you. I hope it answered the question.
Okay, I've got both Phils with their hands up. So Phil McManus is on my left, the left top screen. So you can go first.
Okay,
Phil.
great. Thanks, Bob. Thanks very much, Uni. I was interested in sort of a question that Bill just asked about the seafood, but the follow-up question I think I had was about seems to be a lot of increase in production of seafood, but very little export income. And given you said the use of seafood, I'm just wondering what's happened. Is there an oversupply, or how's it getting to market? And does it mean that the poor people will remain poor if there's no change in the value of seaweed? Sorry. So perhaps if you could just elaborate on that point, that'd be great. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. I'm sorry. I was gonna rephrase the question. Do you mean that how's the poor responding to the market? Or?
No, I was saying your graphs that you showed seem to show a big rise in the increase in production of seaweed. But when you look at the income generated, there's hardly any income still being generated from the seaweed. So I'm just wondering, how is this a good strategy in terms of helping people who are poor if there's no income coming through, unless I've misinterpreted. So just perhaps explain a little bit more about it. Thank you.
Thanks, Phil. Yeah, it's because seaweed is the low value commodities compared to shrimp, crabs, squids, for example. So although the volume is the highest, but actually it's cheap. The price is very low compared to these activities. However, it contributes to the livelihoods of poor people, because it doesn't require a lot of capital to start off seaweed. It doesn't require land. You can just grow seaweed in coastal areas. Of course, it needs some mechanism from the government, but compared to both shrimp farming and marine culture fisheries, it gives the opportunity for the poor to gain income in the increasingly, capital intensification in other sectors.
Okay, thanks, Uni.
Yeah, thanks, Phil.
Okay, Phil Hirsch.
Yeah, thanks. That was a really great presentation, and it's an exciting thesis. And you've done very well to sort of transition from a more sort of local fieldwork based approach to this sort of wider approach, but it presents challenges. And I'm particularly interested in your use of the idea of agrarian transition. And I think that you can perhaps pull this apart a bit, because, on the one hand, agrarian transition has been used to describe the move away from agriculture or to diversify beyond agriculture. So it can be seen as kind of an analogy that within the seafood industry, whether you're talking about fish farming or small scale offshore inshore fishing is that same thing going on. But there's a lot more to the idea of agrarian transition. I'm thinking in particular of changing class relations or changing relations between small scale, large scale producers, local as well as those from outside. And I'm wondering whether, given your change of methodology, this is going to be challenging. But I wonder if there are ways in which you can identify some of those patterns, both within the seafood, coastal fishing and aquaculture industries themselves, but also in their interaction with agriculture, but also with off-farm activity. It's obviously highly complex, but it seems to me that if you're going to be looking at the idea of agrarian transition, there are these other dimensions that may come in, but then which in turn present real challenges if you're not able to do the local field work that gets at some of these sort of microprocesses.
Yeah, thanks, Phil. Well, actually, I'm sorry, I will not be able to do field work, but I have field researchers in Indonesia. Like I think past couple months ago, I have contact in a researcher from University of Queensland, and we have similar topics, and then we talked and we collaborate. So now I can access their data on seaweed, and also I take case studies on crabs industries, crab fishing. So all of that, like class changes and interaction with on farm, off farm, will be collected during the field work by the field researchers, which I will supervise. Thanks, Phil, for the idea. Yeah.
Sure.
I think we have time for one more quick question. If not, we can move to the next presentation. No more? Phil, before we started, Uni expressed interest in getting in contact with about his research. So could you let her know the details, contact details?
Yes, I will indeed. I'll put you in touch. He said he was going to try to join today, but I think other things might have intervened. But indeed, and I guess you may have seen his thesis and one or two things he's published from there as well. But I'll provide those.
Yeah, I'll be interested. Thanks, Phil.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Uni. That was great. Very succinct and very stimulating. So I guess Javad's next.
Okay. Thank you. I'm MD Javed, a PhD student in this school, and I'm from Bangladesh. And Bangladesh is one of the most climate change affected countries in the world. And an intensity of different climate change events like flood, drought, storm surges, cyclone are increasing day by day. So it is not easy to actually decrease the magnitude of climate change events, but better to build the adaptive capabilities to those events. And it is also important to know the shapers of these adaptive capabilities, how the people or household build their adaptive capabilities to financial capital, to climate change. My presentation is all about financial capital as a shaper of households' adaptive capabilities to flood risk in northern Bangladesh. And this presentation is based on the first experimental chapter of my thesis. Bangladesh is very much vulnerable to different climatic events, but flood is one of the leading climatic events that Bangladeshi people are facing. There are different reasons that floods become turns to a very vulnerable to the rural people, like due to the low topography, because Bangladesh land area is less than 15 meters above the sea level, location at the deltaic confluence of three major Asian rivers like Ganges, Brahmaputra, and Meghna. Bangladesh is really becomes more vulnerable to different flood, but climate change also accelerated the situation. Like Himalayan glaciers has the effect of increasing steep flows in the GBM basins, increased unpredictability of monsoonal precipitation can lead to more extreme flood events. And Bangladesh has only 8% of the total catchment area of melting Himalayan glaciers that comes from the Himalaya and flow down to the Bay of Bengal. So flood is very common phenomenon here. Although flooding is a national concern for Bangladesh, threats profile and adaptive capacities differs markedly at the individual place and household scales. Understanding the shapers of these differences represent an important agenda for policy relevant research into Bangladesh's responses to climate change. The aim of this article is to advance knowledge on shapers of adaptation behavior among rural Bangladeshi households by representing findings from original fieldwork from flood vulnerable villages in Chiasgan districts in northern Bangladesh. And for this research, we adopted the sustainable livelihood approach. And sustainable livelihood approach is one of the most important and attractive approach if you want to know that vulnerability and adaptive capacity, especially how the livelihood change from one state to another state, and why and how social actors act on it. Actually, livelihood status is not only depend on access to one capital, but it depends on the interaction between the capitals. As argued by the Bevington, that livelihood strategies are attempts from existing and often severe constraints at a continuous management and modification of the substitution trade-offs and drawdowns on different capital assets. How these trade-offs are made and which ones are preferred vary across the life cycle, also across the short term. My research question is, how do capital assets influence the livelihood vulnerability and adaptive capacity in the context of climate change-induced flooding in northern Bangladesh? And financial capital is really an important capital because of its fungibility, because it is ready ability to intersect into other forms. For example, when there is a flood or when there is any climatic events, if they have some savings, they can use it for at least 1 meal a day. Because most of the people are rural people are poor, so most of the people who is very poor, they don't think 3 meals in a day, but they do some savings so that they can survive at that time. To some extent, not only the financial capital, all the other capitals like physical capital, human capital, natural capital, social capital has some fungibility in nature. However, because financial capital is both an asset and a medium of exchange, it can be metabolized into different asset forms with lower transaction cost and more transparent exchange values. Methodological approach, because we adopted the qualitative method, because most of the past research that they try to find out the interrelationship or association between the different indicators that they use in livelihood approach. They use different analysis like correlation, regression, chi-score. Such approaches effectively identify the coincidence of particular capital combination, but are less able to examine the nuance of capital bundle sequencing, substitution, and strategizing. For this question, qualitative approach has really a merit. Our location of the Bangladesh actually consists of 64 districts. So our location of the study was in Chiasgan district, one of the northern districts of Bangladesh, which is really vulnerable to flood. And northern part of Bangladesh is the economic condition of the northern part of Bangladesh is really poor than any other part of the Bangladesh. This is the sampling procedures of our research. Chiasgan district is consist of 9 upazilas. Upazilas is another administrative unit of district. From these 9 upazilas, we selected 5 upazilas based on the severity of the flood. These 5 upazilas consist of another 45 unions. Union is another sub-administrative unit of upazilas. So from these 45 unions, we selected 2 unions from each upazilas by stratified random sampling, and finally we selected 2 villages from each union by using the same techniques. That means we have 20 villages. And we conducted 1 focus group discussion from each villages. Our focus group participants consist of all categories of farmers and male, female, both. And the result, actually, there's a considerable diversity between and within focus group discussions in the way that participants ascribe financial capital as a catalyzing adaptive responses. There are 11 different indicator components of financial capital. Examination of thematic codes attached to each of these components of financial capital led us to identify 5 mechanisms that connect financial capital to adaptive capabilities with respect to flooding. There are 40 indicators of 5 different capitals to define the national's physical, social, and human capital and financial capital, and how livelihood use the financial capital as a catalyzing effect, as a catalyzing matter to adapt the flood situation, and how this financial capital actually influence accessing other capital and interaction between them to build adaptive capacity. It will be discussed right now. We find 5 mechanisms that financial capital lead to build the adaptive capacity and as well as access to other capital. Number 1 mechanism is financial capital provides opportunities for savings and disposable asset that can be drawn down to facilitate adaptation. Flood is very common in the study area. So every family who has the ability try to do some savings. The saving doesn't mean that they have a lot of money, a lot of savings. Savings means at least we can provide 1 meal a day, or some family also don't have any food. They become very vulnerable, but they try to save money as well as some dry food as well, like rice bar, flattened rice, sugar, so that they can provide some food for the kids and for the old members of the family. So savings is really an important part of their adaptation behavior. So one participant explained like this: beef fattening is very common in village now. We sell this during the biggest Muslim festival because of the higher selling price. We buy another bull for the next year, and the rest of the money we invest for our house repairing savings from this income. Household women usually rear chicken and duck, which they sell to other neighbors, also used for their consumption. When having no other option in flood time, we had to sell a bull at a lower price to supply household cost. Actually, these women, the women who rear duck and poultry, they are actually contributing in family savings. Although this is not a huge amount, but it is really an important factor for the savings. This savings actually helps them to provide faster repair and rejuvenation of farms. Like one person, they say, we save so that we can prepare our field as early as possible and buy seed and fertilizer. After the flood, many weeds remain in the field. It takes labor supply to prepare the land. If they have some savings, they can start their farming after the flood water has gone. So they need as early as possible to take the farm, be ready for the cultivation. So if they have saving, they can buy at least some seed and fertilizer, and they can also prepare the field and hire some labor as well. And another explained that every year we suffer from skin diseases, fever, diarrhea. The miserable condition of kids knows no bound. Most of the villagers are used to live with this disease. But when the situation worsens, we visit village doctor, local pharmacy shops for the medicine, and our minimal savings helps us to afford the cost. That means savings is also helping people to access the health facilities as well. Number 2 mechanism is financial capital enables invest in human and household capital that enhances preparedness and response agility. In rural Bangladesh, the education quality is not, especially school education quality, is not up to the mark like cities and towns. So the people actually get good education who have the opportunities for the private tuition. So one explained that for the last year, I'm dealing with the seasonal grain crops business from where extra profit has been added to my income. It enables me to provide private tuition for my younger son. I admitted my elder son to a good college. My elder son helped me by offering market information and weather update. To know the weather forecasting, I call my son by mobile phone and he tells me the result. That means the household who has good income, he investing the education part of his family member for kids, and he is actually helping in for the weather information, supplying weather update, supply market information. So weather forecasting is really helpful for them so that they can take some precautionary measures like early harvesting or relocation as well. And if they have good educational status, if they have household wealth and access to financial aid, they can have access to the different organization who is actually being the social status as well. So household, as described in one focus group discussion, household economic condition help earn social status, create a good connection with the agriculture office. In addition, they use an Android phone, have a television in their house. These activities allow them to know updated agricultural practices and weather forecasting in advance. Also, who has some mobile phone, that means who have some educated member in the family, he can access the internet, he can use, he can read the SMS as well. It helps them to know the weather information when the flood water is entering the village, when the flood water actually rises to the highest level, when they need to move from the houses, need to go for the shelter, is really helpful for them. That means education and access to ICTs is helping them to adapt to the flood situation. Another explained, we got mobile SMS on flood forecasting. Also, it is broadcasted in radio and television. This helps us to relocate family members and livelihoods in a safe place. We also use a mobile phone to call sub-assistant agricultural officer regarding crop harvesting and post-flood production. That means if people have good economic condition, in the earning source, etc., then they can invest to the education and if they have good education, if they can access to the ICT, which is actually helping them to adapt the flood condition. Number 3 mechanism, financial capital generates remittance earning non-local livelihoods for household members that assist adaptation capabilities. So when there is flood, most of the rural population actually involved in farming. During the flood, they don't have any earning opportunities. So migration is very common in that village. So migration, when they migrated there are 2 types of migration actually they follow. During the flood period, most of the family who has no earning source, they move to cities and town, go for the temporary jobs like rickshaw puller, construction worker, day labor, etc. This actually backed their family with some temporary income. So people explain like flood force to migrate to towns and cities to look for income options, because during this period, our crop field remains underwater. It is challenging to survive with family. While work in the town, we send money back to the village, help us to stay during the flood period. We used to work until the flood situation improve as we leave our families behind. Also, there are some people actually who migrated permanently to the foreign country like Western country or Asian or any Middle East country. They actually send money to the family who is actually contributing the annual family income, and it helps them to buy some for farm mechanization, etc. Like when I want to explain, when I send my son to abroad as a worker, arrange a loan on my farming land to pay the cost. It took almost 1.5 years for a loan repayment. Now the money sent by my son is contributing my family income. In addition, I have bought a tractor for farming, sometimes lend it to farmers, contributing to my income. When they have good income, they actually build their house on highly elevated land, and also they have the tubewell. That tubewell and land never goes underwater if the water goes to the peak. So it is really helpful for them. They want to explain they build a house on a very highly elevated land which never goes underwater, also does not face the drinking water problem. So last year, almost all villagers collected water from their deep tube well. Some households also have rental and permanent house in the district town and move to those places before the flood. Number 4, financial capital provides the basis of obtaining credit. The people needs to borrow some money from somewhere, but they can't borrow the money from the neighbor because all the neighbors face the same situation and the economic condition of the rural people is not up to the mark. So they need to take loan from other like NGOs and bank. And for this option, actually they have land, pool, or any farm household area, farm sizes really provide play an important role to get the loan. One explained, last year I took a loan from one NGO, which helped me to survive during the flood. I made a shelter on the roadside, shifted there with the family, including a disabled mother and 2 cows. I also bought a mobile phone to know the weather information through SMS, call other neighbors and relatives. Household in receipt funds may be also required to be a significant interest cost. Also, the NGO's loan has really high interest cost, but the situation actually forced them to get the loan, but it really worked for them to adapt to the flood, especially to start a new cropping option, to repair the irrigation channel, to hire the labor, or to buy pesticide, insecticide, fertilizer, etc. Also, Household assets are critical into lending terms. Like 2 months ago, I applied for a loan. The amount was 200,000 BDT. It was happy payment for me to receive the expected amount because I had 2 big bulls, 1.2 hectares of land, and also my house is semi-paka type. That means this helped to get the loan from the bank. Last mechanism was actually the financial capital assists agricultural resilience, and it reduces vulnerability to future floods. Bangladesh government has some subsidy policies, like they provide subsidies on fertilizer, farm mechanization, and electricity. That means during the peak irrigation period, that means dry period, they also give some subsidy for electricity use for irrigation. And they explain most of the households are involved in farming. We had to apply large amount of fertilizer in both rice and vegetable field. Therefore, subsidy in fertilizer and availability help us to minimize the production cost. Sometimes you also get seed as a part of subsidy from the Department of Agricultural Extension, especially at the late almond season, is one kind of rain season, just after the flood, to help us to start the new cropping season. So it's subsidies, though, also arguing that we need more subsidies because the people are not there. The subsidy program that the government has present now are not covering all the farmers. They are also arguing that if we have more subsidies, we could actually challenge or you could actually face the flood situation more good way. Conclusion. That means by applying the sustainable livelihood approach, financial capital was identified as pivotal importance in farming households, adaptive capabilities to flood risk in rural Bangladesh. Sustainable livelihood analysis emphasizes the possession of different kinds of capital like physical, natural, social, human, by household. But when participants were asked to describe what determined the capacities for adaptation to flood, their narratives moved strongly and directly onto the importance of financial capital access. Identification of these 5 mechanisms translates our broader argument about financial capital fungibility to the array of adaptation undertaken by flood-affected households, thereby contributing to the middle ground theory about the role of financial capital in adaptive capabilities. The research also reported here tells that an important message about the vulnerability and adaptive capability in an increasingly climate-stressed world. Our focus group in Chiasgon districts provide testimony for the importance of wealth and income in stratifying the impacts of climate change. The message for policymakers like Department of Agricultural Extension and microfinance institution in Bangladesh is that financial measures of vulnerability need to be a foreground in adaptation policies. In a practical sense, this means initiatives such as strengthening the pre- and post-flood access to credit on reasonable terms to ensuring subsidies and assistance measures are weighted towards household in poverty and provisioning household with cash-based social safety nets. Thank you. Thank you, Bob.
Thanks, David. Yeah, that's another good presentation. So thank you very much for that. Well, we've got a few minutes for questions. Jeff wants to start.
Sure, thanks, Javed. Thanks for the presentation. I was wondering about the way you've used the livelihoods framework there. So you talk about the 5 different resources. And of course, the analysis focuses very heavily on financial assets, right? And their fungibility, I think the word that you use, yeah? So in a sense, it's almost like it's a critique of the livelihoods framework. So the livelihoods framework was sort of all about, as I understand it, was broadening the scope out. And so looking at how it's not just about money, and it's about social networks, and it's about this and that. So it seemed to me that your presentation was in a way sort of critiquing that and bringing it back and saying, well, actually, as far as my informants were concerned, it was all about money. Is that right? Have I got that right? And is that sort of the argument?
And I was expecting this question. Me and Bill was actually, I know that everybody will arise this question, And we not only, this is the first findings of the analysis, that people actually, financial capital is the leading role in adaptation or flood adaptation. But the people who are lacking financial capital, they actually social capital. And this social capital, this is our second chapter. We have already started writing up this chapter as well. So financial capital, who has the options of financial capital? It helps to access other capital as well as which actually ultimately help in building adaptive capacity. The people who has lack in financial capital choose most cases financial capital, social capital. So this is another chapter we are writing right now. Yeah, not only the financial capital. Okay.
Okay, thanks, Javed. Javed, could you unshare your screen?
Yeah, sure. Sorry.
Thanks. And I think the next question is Kurt.
Yeah, hey, and thanks, Javed. It's really interesting. And maybe this flows on from Jeff's question, but what struck me is across a whole bunch of your examples of how people are using their financial capital, they're using it to get mobile phones that enable them to then keep in touch with relatives, understand weather patterns and emergency warnings, etc. So I guess it struck me that that's an example maybe of sometimes how the financial capital does interact with some of those other forms of capital, in the sense that the phone becomes the kind of connective tissue in networks of social capital and community capital. But also for, I guess, the policymaker implications that you're wanting to think through, it also tells me that the ICT infrastructure that is state provided seems to be just as important to people's well-being in situations here as their capacity, you know. So it's partly they have the money as a household to get the phone, but they're also clearly more and more dependent on ICT infrastructure that keeps the phone working, even during flood events and, you know, climate moments. So yeah, I'd just be interested to hear a bit more about that, and also whether you do think that that infrastructure funding thing is, you know, part of the story that you're finding out in your field work.
Yeah, I can understand. Actually, our thesis is all about the access to different capital. That means how the financial capital. That means who has the high family income, then he actually buy a mobile phone. And you know, from the flood forecasting and warning center of Bangladesh, they sent a message in local Bengali language to the people. But you know, who has no access to, that means who has no income, he can't access to mobile phone. That means it is not contributing ultimately, this is not contributing to adaptive capabilities. Then they use the social capital, different social network. Then the people actually they help, relatives comes to help one another, or their neighbors is coming to help, or someone is coming to help like this way. But our main focus is in how financial capital helps to access different capital, and how this combination is finally contributing to adaptive capacities. This is the main thing. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. One thing that struck me there is that the question is, where does the power come from for the mobile phones? And I'm from what I saw when I visited the Sundarbans, it's quite likely that it's all a very large amount of sort of little private solar batteries and cells. Is that right?
Yeah, it varies. Actually, there are some upazilas means sub-administrative unit of districts. So there's some villages, they have the solar panel, but most of the villages is under the electricity. So Bangladesh is now currently is very good position, is fully electricity supplied village. So, but you said correctly, there are some villages who actually lives very far from the cities, like very close to the river. They have not actually, they have no electricity supply. They use the solar panel, and also this solar panel they use for the television and the mobile phone charging, and for the one tube light in a house. That's for their survival settings they use.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Any other questions? We've got a few minutes left.
I'd like to ask a question. Hi, Jeffrey. Thank you for your presentation. Really interesting. Yeah, I just one thing I've been wondering whether you find any like gender related issues in your research, and also regarding the financial capital. what do you think is the impact of having high financial capital and collective action in the community? Thank you.
From the observation of focus group discussion, everybody discussed that role of gender, especially if you say the women. I have mentioned in my first quotation of past mechanism that if people actually in a rural village, they rear duck and different poultry parts. So this is actually done by the female members of the family. And, they play an important role, when there is a flood. If there is a flood, actually the male members of the family goes for the earning options or goes for the collection of different food or business, something like that, different earning options. But the female members of the family really play an important role by taking care of their kids, taking care of the livestock, taking care of the old member, as well as they also said like that female members of the family always remains on the water, because they don't have any option. They have to look after their kids. They have to look up. Also, they have to cook. Also, they had to collect fossil fuel for the cook as well. So it's really gender as an important role. But they mentioned that, but we didn't actually analyze the role of gender by a different way. But it could be done as well.
Thanks, Javed.
Thank you, Javed. So any more questions or any other comments? No? Well, I thank you both, I think, for some great presentations. It's quite nice to sort of catch up with some of the postgrad work, which we haven't had much of chance to do that this year. So thank you very much.